Hi, I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I am going to be doing a dual book review, and the theme is going to be ghosts. But not like scary ghosts, like a little bit scary, but not really that scary. But really, these are more just gonna be two books that I read that I felt like were a reminder that ghost stories, whether, they're like scary or not scary, are really just about the fact that we are not so alone in this world. So these are both very recent releases. They've had a lot of buzz about them, and also I really loved them. The first book I'm gonna be talking about is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, and the second is The Girl and the Ghost by Hannah Alcoff. So first off, Cemetery Boys, this is a YA fantasy novel set in LA. Our main character is Yadriel. His family is part of this long tradition of brujex. They're able to do magic. So in particular, women are able to heal others and men are able to summon ghosts. Yadriel is trans, and so in addition to getting his family to recognize his gender in terms of his pronouns and his name, he's also trying to get them to recognize him as a brujo, so like recognizing that his powers manifest as such. That acceptance is varied and complicated by the fact that Yadriel's mother has passed away recently, and she was really someone who had supported him a lot, but he does have the support of some of his family members, including his cousin Maritza. When another one of his cousins, Miguel, is murdered, Yadriel decides that he's going to go out and summon Miguel's ghost, both because he wants to help out his family in this way, and also because he wants them to recognize again that his powers are like that he's a brujo. So he goes out to do this, but in the process he accidentally summons the ghost of one of his schoolmates instead. His schoolmate's named Julian, and now he's stuck with Julian, who is like, you brought me back, now you gotta help me. And so now they are figuring all of that out. Like a lot of people on BookTube, I heard about this book from Audrey over at Perpetual Pages. They've been talking about this book a lot, and I would highly recommend watching their video 5 Reasons to Read Cemetery Boys. And like, first of all, I mean, you should be watching Audrey's videos anyways, because I just like am always in awe of like how well they are able to talk about books that they love. Like, as someone who really struggles to be like, yes, this is why I love this book, the way they are able to like sell me basically on anything, I'm just always in awe of. But like for this book in particular, I really appreciated that video because I think it helped me see things that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, just because this is not like a book that is, connected to my cultural or personal sense of identity. Hearing the way they talked about the book like helped me learn a lot more about this book than I think I would have just gotten on my own. So highly recommend that video to begin with. I also talked about Cemetery Boys in my recent library book check-in video, and I specifically talked about wanting to read it because I was like in the mood for something plotty. And I think, because this is a YA book, and because, there's this combination of Yadriel's cousin's been murdered and there's the schoolmate who died who doesn't know how he died, like I was really like thinking like, okay, like that's a lot of mystery. Like the crux of this book is going to be solving all of that. Like that sounds like a plot that I can really get into. And so I'm going to start out by saying that Cemetery Boys was actually not really that. Like it does have that mystery, but I don't really think of that as the crux of this book. There is a mystery in the beginning of this book and there is a resolution to it at the end of it, but the middle, like, I mean, it does check in with that mystery a few times, but it's not really about that. It's much more focused on Yadriel and Julian and really how they're learning more about themselves through each other and like how they see each other and this trust and relationship that they're forming. And I'm kind of like two different minds about this whole like pseudo mystery plot that's not really super vital to the story except to start it and end it. And I'm gonna start with the more critical take, which is that, like, as you might guess, like this does weird things to the pacing of the book. The beginning of this book has like a lot going on. It's setting up Yadriel's first rituals, it's setting up like a murdered cousin, it's setting up ghost summonings gone wrong. There is a lot to set up. But once it's all like very quickly like set up and assembled, the plot slows down very quickly. There's like stuff that still happens, but it doesn't really do much to advance the plot as much as it advances our understanding of like the relationship between our two main characters. The pacing only really picks up again towards the end when things need to wrap up. And I found those abrupt changes in pacing like a little bit distracting, but also I ended up not minding because when I realized that the middle of this book, like what it was really going to be about was going to be this slow paced stuff that's really much more focused on Yadriel and Julian, I ended up really loving it because I found that stuff both so so deeply thought out and just so endearing. Gabrielle and Julien are similar in that they both have like a lot of loneliness about them, but they're each their kind of like own individualized form of loneliness. Gabrielle has grown up in a huge family, so he's grown up surrounded by people, but he's trying to get them to understand and accept him, and that manifests in like a sort of insecurity, not like in knowing who he is, because he very much does, but in terms of trying to get his family to see that. And in contrast, Julien appears so much more confident, like very like, you know, this is who I am, take it or leave it, kind of like he seems so much more sure of himself. But as the story builds and you see the ways that he feels not as confident, or he feels like he's a burden on his brother who's been taking care of him, the ways in which he's processing like his own death and how it affects other people, like you really get like a sense for how lonely he must feel. And alongside that, they're both figuring out like their identity and masculinity and what all of that means to themselves and each other. And sometimes that means affirming each other, and sometimes it means calling each other out. And I love that they do both of those, because I think that's so key to the ways that they're building trust and ultimately friendship and then romance. About halfway through this book, I realized that this was like the first YA book I've read in a while that felt like I was actually reading about teenagers. And I need to like caveat that with two things. So first, I am 31. So at this point in my life, when I make a bold statement about what teenagers are like, I'm really working off a memory of what I think my friends and I were like more than a decade ago. Number two, I don't actually read that much YA, and when I do, I'm usually reading YA fantasy, and YA fantasy that's set in other worlds, not in LA and like in a high school. And so like in those worlds, those characters might like have sort of like teenagey personality traits. They might be kind of like working through their identity and all of these very like teenage arcs that we associate with YA. But even if they feel teenager in this way, they're also sort of dealing with a level of intrigue that requires like a sense of maturity that like I know that I was not capable of at 16. And I think with Cemetery Boys, like it would be easy to just kind of boil down the teenagerness of Julien and Gabrielle to that sort of, you know, figuring out your identity, sort of like coming of age thing. And that is a big part of this story. But the passage that really cemented to me, like just like how teenage they were, is really less about navigating uncertainty and more about establishing some kind of certainty with the sort of like no bullshit attitude that I think is like so important to being a teenager. In this passage, Yatriel is talking about the insecurity he feels about getting his family to accept him. And in doing so, he says that he is the first trans Brujex. And Julien points out with like such clear simplicity, like the utter improbability that in the thousands of years that Brujex have been around, that Yadriel would be the first person to not fit into a rigid definition of gender. I thought about that passage a lot, in part just because I love how in disagreeing with Yadriel, Julien is like actually making him feel connected to a whole history, like that he before hadn't realized that like was probably like there, like that even if he doesn't know the specifics of is there. I also love it because, like I said, it is so teenager. And when I say that, I don't mean that it's like immature or anything. I just mean that everything from the logic to the way that Julien delivers it is just so refreshingly straightforward and to the point. And like, obviously adults are straightforward too. And I don't want to be like putting like teenagers on a pedestal here or anything. Some of growing up is realizing that the things that you thought were straightforward as a teenager are like not actually that straightforward, that there actually is more nuance. And so like when adults said annoying things like it's actually more complicated than that, like actually they were kind of correct. But also like it's not always that complicated either. And I think sometimes when you grow up and you become an adult, like you start to hide behind those supposed complications to avoid dealing with simpler truths and how the world should work. And that's where it's useful to have teenagers who will often just cut through that bullshit. I love that moment, which is really in line with so much of what I loved about Julien's character and how he fits with Yadriel's character. This is truly, I think, one of the sweetest romances I've read this year, and I read a lot of romance, so I feel like that should hopefully say something. I also want to give a quick shout out to Yadriel's cousin Maritza, who is also just like an excellent side character. I love her. Part of it is just like I sort of have like an affection for vegan characters, because not because I'm vegan, like I'm just vegan adjacent because of my husband. So like anytime a book takes the time to like talk about cooking vegan food and not just make it like a bougie Gwyneth Paltrow kind of thing, like I just really appreciate that. So I don't know, I also she's also just awesome. There's a lot of things about her that I love too. So really like it's like the characters in general, like all of them. There's just a lot of love in this book. You can feel it. So I loved Cemetery Boys, and it wasn't exactly the book like I was expecting it to be, but like I loved what it turned out to be. If the ghost story of Cemetery Boys is a romantic affirmation, The Girl and the Ghost is something a little bit darker, but also still quite beautiful and hopeful about friendship and family. The Girl and the Ghost is a middle grade novel, and it's set in a village in Malaysia. The book alternates between two points of view, the girl and the ghost. The ghost is a Pelicet, a sort of like dark spirit who will do like favors for witches. And so the Pelicet is a figure from Malaysian mythology, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing it. I was trying to look up pronunciations and was having sort of a hard time figuring out what guides were like giving me the right thing. So if I'm mispronouncing it, please let me know down below. When the witch dies, the Pelicet goes on to find her young granddaughter, Soraya, who is the girl in the story. Soraya names the ghost Pink, because of course, and the two go on to become friends. Soraya grows up quite lonely in her family. It's just her and her mother, who is caring but also distant. Soraya is also bullied in school, so when it comes to friends, it's really just Pink. And Pink wants Soraya to find new friends, really wants to help Soraya, but once Soraya actually does make a new friend, like she makes this friend named Jingwei, who is very into teaching her about Star Wars and also loves looking at Soraya's drawings, like all of this stuff, like they're totally bonding over all this stuff. Once that happens, Pink starts to get jealous. And that's problematic because it turns out the dark spirits are all well and good until you ask them to kindly not punish your friend for being your friend, and then suddenly they have a really hard time restraining themselves. I think I first heard about this book on Twitter, but I cannot remember who mentioned it, so I apologize. But all I remember is that they said it was sort of like an emotional roller coaster, and that's apparently a thing I'm like in the mood for right now. So I was like, cool, yeah, you know, I kind of want something that'll be like a fast read and also devastate me. And as you might be able to tell from the plot, there are a lot of emotional things to contend with in this story. The relationship between Pink and Soraya alternates between being this like incredibly beautiful, fun thing and then being this incredibly scary thing, depending on Pink's mood. And as Soraya grows up, her relationship with Pink changes in ways that, you know, Pink can't really adjust to because Pink is a ghost and can't mature. So when Soraya's interests are diverted, Pink feels, you know, basically kind of abandoned. In some ways, Soraya and Pink are similar to Yadriel and Julian in that, like, through the magic of ghosthood, they are able to, like, feel a little bit less lonely. They're able to form this kind of kinship. But the world and magic of the girl and the ghost is different from Cemetery Boys. And so Soraya and Pink's friendship faces its own set of challenges as Soraya has to protect her new human friend. This book is playing like a really delicate balance with Pink as both like friend and foe, and the result both heightens the tension and makes you see how conditional our sense of belonging can become. On the one hand, you can't help but feel happy for Soraya because she's got like a real human friend. Jingwei is such a nerd and I love her. She speaks in Star Wars references, which could be annoying, except like it's really adorable because she's trying to get her friend Soraya to see how great Star Wars is. Like she's trying to convince her, and sometimes it seems to work, sometimes it doesn't. But on the other hand, you have Pink, and it's really hard to explain to a ghost why this friendship is necessarily different for Soraya than like Pink and Soraya's friendship. It just is, and we know from the start that Pink is like coming off a stint of doing like some bad shit for Soraya's grandmother. And so like a big part of the experience of this book is feeling for all of these characters, even when you know that Soraya and Pink's friendship is becoming toxic. And with the shifting point of view, we know why Pink sees Soraya's friendship as a threat, even though Pink was the one that encouraged her into it. And so I guess like part of the horror of this book is like watching a character you want to root for do a thing that you don't want them to do. And it's dark, but it's also woven into this bigger story of friendship and grief. This is a middle grade novel, and the story moves along quite briskly, but never so fast that you don't feel the weight of individual moments. There's a joy to this book, like as Soraya makes friends and she's developing her confidence, like she's becoming more of herself. And so like even when there's this tough stuff going on, like you know that there's this core joy to the book, but it's also a joy that ends up coming with a cost for the characters, and I found it kind of complicated to process just because some of the things that happen and some of the things that get revealed like hit on my own sort of like emotional pressure points, but I also just really loved it. In addition to these specific plot elements, I also just want to shout out the whole setting that Alkaf painted here. I haven't been to Malaysia, so like I have no idea now if like the version that's in my head after coming out of this book is like anything like it. Like, that's not about her writing, that's just like about how I am imagining, like based on what she's written. But I love the way that she drew in everything from food to clothes to transportation, like all of these things she pulled together to like give like all of this sense of space and like adventure to the story. Like I said, I loved both of these books. I love how they tell stories about friendship and relationships using ghosts. Who knew? Ghosts are so good at this kind of thing. I do want to add one more little mini rec that's not a book, but like if you were in a mood for like ghost stories like these ones that are really more about like making you cry a little, and this rec is for the Korean drama Hotel Del Luna, which I watched a few months ago when I was sort of like kind of like in my like, wow, 2020, like what a fucking year mood, right? Like, and I didn't even know how much of this year was gonna be. Hotel Del Luna is about a hotel for ghosts transitioning to the afterlife, and it's just such a perfect storm of feelings for like, you know, any kind of story you want that's about like understanding like your loneliness or your relationships or your mistakes, like how they build up into a life, even like, you know, when that life is not around. And also like how we move on from that and how we come to accept that. I don't know, it's a weird month, it's a weird year, and I feel like my tastes have been like all over the place. Like either like I want things that are like super dark or like super cozy, and somehow these kinds of ghost stories feel like they are a weird like way to kind of unite those two extremes. Like, you know, like the stories and the characters are all a little bit dark, but the feelings are cozy, like but sad, but like in a cozy way. So if you have recommendations for similar kinds of ghost stories or anything, or if you've read these books and you want to talk about them, let me know down below. And thank you guys for watching. Bye.